Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to our channel, True Courtroom Stories. Today, we're diving into some absolutely fascinating research by Mr. Zahir Ahmed Mir. We're going to explore a really powerful question. What if the first real Bill of Rights wasn't written in the 18th century, but centuries and centuries earlier in Africa? It's a huge idea, so let's get right into it. And hey, if you enjoyed this journey we're about to take, please subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and share it with your friends. It really helps us out.
So let's start with this question. Just let it sink in for a moment. Most of us, we learn in school that the U.S. Bill of Rights from 1791 was this revolutionary starting point for constitutional rights. But what if that whole timeline is off? What if the real origin story is much older and comes from a completely different part of the world? This one question could totally reshape how we think about the history of human rights.
So here's our game plan, our roadmap for this journey. First, we're going to uncover this ancient blueprint for rights. Then, we'll see how it wasn't just theory. It was actually put to the test. After that, we'll trace its echoes all the way to 18th century America and even into modern-day Pakistan. And finally, we'll land on a pretty powerful conclusion about what rights really are.
All right, let's begin. Our story doesn't start in a powdered wig-filled hall in Philadelphia. Nope. We need to go way back to West Africa, to the year 1235, in the powerful and sprawling Mali Empire. This is the stage where a document was created that was, for its time, completely revolutionary.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's staggering. The Kurukan Fuga Charter comes into being in 1235. That's over 5.5 centuries before the U.S. Bill of Rights. To put that into perspective, that's a longer time gap than between the founding of the United States and today. And this wasn't some forgotten text. It was preserved and championed during the reign of the legendary Mansa Musa, so it had real staying power.
So what exactly was this charter? Well, you can think of it like a constitution. It was an oral charter proclaimed before this great assembly of leaders. But here's the kicker. Its main focus wasn't just about who gets to be in charge. It was explicitly designed to guarantee fundamental rights to every single person living in the empire. It was a charter for the people.
And the ideas inside it, they are just astonishingly modern. I mean, we're talking about guarantees of human dignity. The rights of women were specifically protected. So were inheritance rights. It outlawed arbitrary killing. It even had clauses for environmental protection. And maybe most important of all, it put real limits on the power of the king and created a separation of powers between the state and the various clans. This is some seriously advanced thinking for the 13th century.
Okay, so it all sounds amazing on paper, right? But was it just a nice speech, or did it have teeth? Was it actually the law of the land? Well, it absolutely was. It was used to settle real disputes and deliver justice. So let's take a look at how it actually worked in practice.
The research provides a perfect example to illustrate this, a classic land dispute. You have two clans, one of herders and one of farmers, and they're in conflict over who gets to use a piece of land. This is the kind of age-old problem that could easily lead to violence. So it was a real test for this new legal framework.
And the court's ruling, which was based on the Charter's principles, was just so clear and wise. It came down to 3 points. 1, the land doesn't belong to a ruler or a chief, it belongs to the community that depends on it. 2, a chief's job isn't to be a warlord and dominate, it's to be a mediator and find peace. And 3, the most important one, taking land by force, absolutely forbidden.
And this is the line that just says it all. The judge's final pronouncement wasn't just a legal point, it was a moral one. No person may take land by force, for land feeds all. It's beautiful, right? Justice wasn't about power. It was about the well-being of everybody. The land's purpose was to sustain the community, so any violence over it was an attack on society itself.
Okay, now hold on, because we're about to jump forward 556 years and zip across the Atlantic Ocean. Because those ideas, those principles laid down in a Malian courtroom, they didn't just disappear. You can almost hear them echoing in one of the most famous legal documents in all of history.
I mean, when you put them side by side like this, the parallels are just undeniable. The Kurukan Fuga Charter's focus on human dignity, property rights, and limiting the power of the state, those are the exact same foundational ideas that power the U.S. Bill of Rights. The idea of due process is really just a modern way of talking about protecting human dignity from arbitrary power. It's the same core concept. An individual has rights that the government cannot just ignore.
And the echo doesn't stop in 18th century America. We can trace this frequency even further, right into the 20th century. We can see these same principles shaping the fundamental laws of a modern nation, showing this incredible, common thread of humanity's desire for justice, connecting different times and different continents.
This table really just lays it all out for us. Let's walk through it. You start with the Kurukan Fuga principle of human dignity. That echoes as due process in the U.S. Bill of Rights, and it appears as security of person in Article 9 of Pakistan's Constitution. Or take the prohibition of force to seize land that connects directly to property rights in both the U.S. and Pakistan. And the idea of limits on royal power, that's the direct ancestor to the separation of powers and the whole concept of a chapter on fundamental rights. It's a clear line.
So when we zoom in on Pakistan's constitution, specifically Articles 9 through 28, what do we see? We see this incredible list of rights guaranteed to every citizen. The right to life and liberty, equality, freedom of speech, a fair trial, protection of property. This isn't just a modern legal document. You can see it as a modern expression of an ancient promise, a promise first made on the plains of Kurukan Fuga almost 800 years ago. So, after this incredible journey, from 13th century Africa to 18th century America to 20th century Asia, what's the big takeaway? What does all this tell us about ourselves and about the idea of justice? It all boils down to this. This is the core truth, the ratio decidendi. That's a legal term for the fundamental reason behind a decision. And the reason here is this: rights are older than states and stronger than rulers. The idea of fundamental human rights isn't something a government gives you. This history shows us it's an ancient, universal idea. It's an idea that says your dignity as a human being comes first, before the power of any king, president, or state. And that brings us to the final lesson from this research. You see, it's one thing to believe in rights, but the act of writing them down, of making them the law, of building your entire society on them, that is the moment a society transforms. That's the moment it truly becomes a civilization. So we'll leave you with this final question to think about. If these principles of human dignity and justice are nearly 800 years old, what does that tell us about the rights that people are still fighting so hard for all around the world today? Something to ponder. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive, which, once again, was based on the incredible research of Mr. Zahir Ahmad we hold so dear. So, let's get right into it. And hey, if you enjoyed this journey, please make sure you subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and share it with your friends. It really helps us out.
Life, liberty, and property. You know these words, right? They're practically the foundation of modern law, written into constitutions all around the globe. They feel so solid, so modern. But what if I told you the story behind these words is way, way older than you probably think?
And that's really the big question we're tackling today. You know, the common story usually kicks off in Europe, or maybe America, just a few centuries ago. But today, we're going to completely challenge that narrative. We're going to travel back in time and to a completely different continent.
Okay, so take a look at this timeline. That date on the right, 1791, that should ring a bell. That's when the U.S. Bill of Rights was ratified. A huge moment for freedom and liberty. But look over the left. See that question mark? It's pointing to a much older blueprint for human rights. The real question is, how much older are we talking about?
1235. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's more than 550 years before the U.S. Bill of Rights was even a thought. This one date completely changes the story of human rights. So what on earth happened in the year 1235?
Well, for that, we have to journey to the Great Mali Empire, founded by the legendary leader Sundiata Keita. It was right here, in 1235, that one of the most incredible legal documents in all of human history was created.
It's called the Kurukan Fuga Charter. And this wasn't just some list of suggestions. It was, for all intents and purposes, a constitutional document. It was a formal, legal guarantee of human rights for every person in the empire. Think about that, a concept that most of the world wouldn't even begin to grapple with for hundreds of years.
And just look at what this charter guaranteed. Human dignity as a right, the rights of women, inheritance rights, protection for the environment, and maybe most stunning of all, it placed limits on the power of the king himself. These are ideas that feel incredibly progressive even now. To see them written down as law in the 13th century, it's just astonishing.
But here's the thing. These weren't just fancy words on a piece of paper. The charter was the actual law of the land, and it was used to settle real disputes. To really see its power, let's take a look at a fascinating case that came up between some herders and farmers.
So you've got this classic conflict, right? A fight over who gets to use the land. But But instead of the strongest group just taking it by force, the case goes to a court that operates under the rules of the charter. And the court's ruling? Absolutely revolutionary. It declares that the land belongs to the community as a whole, not to any single powerful ruler. So the final judgment was that the local chiefs had to mediate and find a peaceful solution because violence over land was strictly forbidden.
This was the judge's actual pronouncement, and the logic behind it is just so powerful. Justice wasn't about who had the biggest army or the most influence. It was based on a core human principle. The land is a shared resource that everyone needs to survive. It was a system built on justice for the entire community.
Okay, so this is where the story gets even crazier. This ancient African charter, it didn't just disappear into history. Its core ideas, its legal DNA, echoed down through the centuries and across continents. They actually show up again in some of the most famous legal documents ever written.
Just take a look at this chart. It's amazing. Under property rights, the 1235 Charter says land belongs to communities. Centuries later, you see similar protections in the U.S. Bill of Rights and Pakistan's Constitution. For due process, the Charter demanded peaceful mediation. Later documents call it a fair trial. The protection of human life, it's right there in 1235, just as it is in 1791 and today. The parallels are they're undeniable.
I mean, really think about that for a second. The core idea that you have a right to your property and that legal fights have to be settled through a fair and peaceful process, these principles that are so central to the American legal system were being actively practiced in the Mali Empire more than 500 years earlier.
And this legal thread doesn't stop there. It continues right into the modern day. You can look at Pakistan's own constitution. In the chapter on fundamental rights, it guarantees these exact same protections: security of the person, the right to a fair trial, equality, property rights. It just goes to show that this fundamental desire for justice is a universal human value with incredibly deep cross-cultural roots.
So, after all this, what's the big takeaway? What does this hidden history really teach us about the relationship between ordinary people and those in power? Well, the legacy is pretty profound.
This right here is the heart of it. This is the core legal idea from the source material. And it's such a powerful thought. Rights are older than states and stronger than rulers. It means that our fundamental rights don't come from a government or a king. They are inherent to us as human beings. They exist before a state is even formed. A government's job is just to protect them, not to grant them.
And this is the moral of the story. What's the difference between just a group of people and a true civilization? It's this very act. The act of formally recognizing and legally protecting those inherent rights. It's the moment we all agree that justice and dignity belong to everyone, and we write it down as the law of the land.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought for today. The story of the Kurukan Fuga Charter was hidden from so many of us for so long. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other foundational stories about our shared global history have just been overlooked? What other incredible truths are just sitting there, waiting for us to rediscover them?
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. This explainer was based on the incredible research from True Courtroom Stories, authored by Mr. Zahir Ahmed Mir, whose work is uncovering these vital connections in our shared legal history.
I mean, just think about that for a second. It's this radical notion that our rights aren't just handed down to us by kings or presidents or governments. No, they are inherent. They exist within us. They're older than any state and more powerful than any single ruler. This concept has been like a quiet revolution, echoing through history. And its origins, well, they might just surprise you.
So, where does our journey begin? You might be thinking ancient Greece, maybe Rome, but nope, we're heading to the vibrant Mali Empire of 13th century West Africa. It was right here that a document known as the Kurukan Fuga Charter was born. And believe me, this wasn't just some list of laws. It was a truly bold vision for a society built on the foundation of human dignity. Okay, to really grasp just how huge this is, let's put it on a timeline. The Kurukan Fuga Charter was established in 1235. Let that number sink in, 1235. That is more than 5 centuries before the U.S. Bill of Rights was even drafted. This visual really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? It shows just how profoundly ahead of its time this African charter really was. So let's be absolutely clear about what we're looking at here. This document, introduced by the great Emperor Sundiata Keita, is recognized as one of the very first constitutional documents in the history of the world to specifically guarantee human rights. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was the foundational text for a whole new kind of society. So what did this charter actually promise? This is where it gets truly astonishing. We're not talking about just basic rules here. We're talking about concepts like the dignity of every single person, specific rights for women, inheritance rights, environmental protection, and get this, limits on the power of the king himself. It even outlawed arbitrary killing. For the 13th century, these ideas weren't just progressive, they were absolutely revolutionary.
But, having principles on paper is one thing, actually applying them is something else entirely. So how did this charter actually work in the real world? Let's zoom in on a specific court case and see how these grand ideas were used to solve a common, everyday problem.
The case itself was a classic dispute, the kind of thing you could find anywhere in the world at any point in history. You had a group of herders and a group of farmers, and they were in a serious conflict over a piece of land. Each side was convinced they had the right to it. It was up to the charter court to find a just and lasting solution. And the court's approach was just remarkable. Instead of just picking a winner and a loser, it applied the charter's logic step by step. First, it established a foundational principle: land belongs to the communities, not to the rulers. Second, it clarified that a leader's job is to mediate conflict, not to dominate the people. And finally, it laid down an unbreakable rule: using violence to settle a land dispute was completely forbidden.
The judge's final ruling really captured the entire philosophy in one powerful, beautiful sentence. No person may take land by force, for land feeds all. This wasn't just a verdict. It was a profound moral statement. It declared that essential resources belong to everyone, to the community, to be shared and protected, never ever to be conquered.
And this right here is where the story becomes truly incredible. These ideas from 13th century Mali, they didn't just fade away into history. No, they became part of a golden thread, a continuum of thought about human rights that connects directly to the legal systems that you and I live under today. The echoes are absolutely undeniable.
The connection just becomes crystal clear when you put them side by side like this. On the left, you've got the Kurukan Fuga's core principles: protecting property, ensuring due process, and limiting the state's power. And on the right, the very same bedrock ideas you'll find in modern constitutions, from the United States all the way to Pakistan. The centuries and cultures might be different, but the blueprint for justice is startlingly, wonderfully familiar.
I mean, just take the U.S. Bill of Rights, for example. The protection of property, the guarantee of due process, freedom from arbitrary state action. These aren't just modern legal concepts that appeared out of nowhere. They are the direct descendants of the same fundamental problems that the jurists of the Mali Empire were wrestling with almost 600 years earlier. The parallel is it's undeniable.
And we see the exact same pattern in Pakistan's constitution, in its chapter on fundamental rights: the right to life and liberty, the right to a fair trial, equality for all citizens. Again and again, it's a direct echo of the principles that gave the Kurukan Fuga its power. You see, this isn't a coincidence. It's a testament to how truly universal these hopes for justice really are.
So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Why does a 700-year-old African charter matter to us today, right now? Well, it matters because it reminds us that the fight for justice and human rights is a shared global story, with deep roots in places we might not expect.
If there's one core lesson to take from this whole journey, it is this: the act of writing down rights, of making them official, permanent, and bigger than any single person or ruler, is what transforms a society into a true civilization. It's that crucial moment when we all agree to be governed by principles, not just by raw power.
And that leaves us with a final question to think about. The Kurukan Fuga addressed the most important rights of its time: land, life, and the limits of power. So as we look to the future, what fundamental rights, maybe ones concerning technology, the environment, or our digital lives, what rights will be the ones that define the great civilizations of tomorrow?
This whole exploration was made possible by the incredible research of Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir for True Courtroom Stories. If you found this journey through history as valuable as we did, please do us a huge favor. Share this explainer with your friends so others can discover it too. Please give it a like, and of course be sure to subscribe for more